Hello and welcome to our September Masterclass. This month it's a little different because we recorded this Masterclass 2 days ago, but in actual fact it did not record. So this is a very special repeat for those of you who were waiting for the replay. We wanted to make sure that you didn't miss out. So I've asked Jo if she would be willing to do it one more time, and fortunately, she's agreed because she knows how many of you have been waiting to catch the replay. So, allow me first to introduce Dr. Jo Fahey. Jo, I first met many years ago when with one of our very first Professional Learning International workshops. She and her husband, Calvin Sparks, came to first Dubai and then Frankfurt for workshops. And it was all because of a book that Jo had written and had published by the International Baccalaureate. Her book is called Ways to Learn Through Inquiry, Guiding Children to Deeper Understanding. And having read that book, I invited along to do the first of many workshops. Jo has since returned to Europe many times and has done workshops around the world. She is based in Australia and she brings a wealth of knowledge and experience from her work with children from 0 through to 8 years in schools and preschools, and she's also taught in universities. So today I'm going to hand over to Jo for this month's masterclass. Thanks, Jo.
Thank you, Rachel. Take two. So people who only got to watch half of it because they had to go to meetings and things like that, people in Europe and the UK, you'll notice that it's slightly different perhaps to the one we ran 2 nights ago. So I'm going to do an acknowledgement of the people in my land. I acknowledge and respect the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands I'm broadcasting from today. They are called the Ghana people from the Adelaide Plains. I also pay my respects to all First Nations people throughout the world. And just before we start the main part, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my course, The Power of Play, International Conversations, which starts, I'll move my photo out of the way so I can see the date, October 27. Only about 7 days left of early bird pricing if you would like to enroll in that, if you haven't already, and if you haven't already done the course. And there's a link at the bottom there, Professional Learning International link, and I think Rachel can also put a link so that you can see in the recording. And these are the educators who join me in The Power of Play, 11 different educators from all around the world who work in international schools, and Rachel also joins us, so 12 of us all together. And the topic for today, anything can be anything, anybody can be anybody, transformation in children's play. Oh, didn't change the date to the 19th, but here we are. So if you could remember about copyright, please refrain from taking screenshots or recordings, and the photographs of the children obviously need to be respected, as does the intellectual property of this presentation. Don't mind if you take a screenshot at the end. I'll put the 2 courses up that I teach if you want to take a screenshot of that or of my book if you're interested. So here we have a centre of disguise. And to set the scene, let's see how one teacher, a colleague of mine, Leanne, created opportunities for children to transform themselves, for anybody to be anybody that they imagined. And the children had input as to what kinds of clothes and hats and fabric that they could put into their centre of disguise. Some children brought things from home, and yeah, the teacher also supplied some fabric. And I think we asked for donations from a local fabric shop and they gave them to us. And Leanne and her dad made this out of wood. And when I asked, can I have a look inside? Of course, she opened the curtain and there was some non-breakable glass mirrors at the back and various things on the left and the right-hand side for the children to dress up in. And this is what some of the children said when Leanne asked them and wrote it down. And this idea of the centre of disguise came from Reggio Emilia in Italy. She had read a lot about the Reggio Emilia philosophy, and some of her colleagues had been to Reggio and come back very excited. And so the other thing, of course, we know about Reggio Emilia is documenting what children think and say. So this is what Eden said. I love the centre of disguise. I like to dress up as a security guard and act out what they do to help people. Then we go to the shop and buy stuff. We need money to buy things, the right money. And Jess, 6 years, said, I like dressing up because you can act like another character in a story. You can pretend to be other people and see things in different ways. And Sam, 7 years, said, getting dressed in the centre of disguise means you can transform yourself in there and surprise everyone when you come out. So Leanne had obviously used that language with the children over time. This is, about the middle of the year, I think. And she'd obviously used the word transform. So the children used that in their language too. And they wrote a lot of stories, wrote all the time. And so they were always doing little plans about who are your characters and what's the storyline. So character was another word, of course, that they knew. So yeah, beautiful little story about just one place where I was doing my research in Adelaide and got to see this over a number of years, many different children. And Rachel, you have something about a centre of disguise as well.
Yeah, inspired by a visit from you when we were in Frankfurt, Joe. Frankfurt International School Primary also set up a center of disguise. We simply used one of those folding sort of privacy screens so the children could slip behind the privacy screen and put their costume or fabric on and then come out. And then we had a standing mirror that they could check how their costume looked. And then the children had baskets and boxes that they organized the fabrics and costumes into. They made their own labels, and it certainly became a favorite place to go. So, giving children that opportunity to take on a new role was a really interesting way to watch how that helped to develop their play.
Yes, and I do remember giving the workshop and then people getting lots of ideas. And when I came back another time to do another workshop, I walked into that huge space that you have outside on, I think it was on the top floor, outside the classrooms, and there was I think it was a parent. I don't think it was a woodworker that you had employed, and he was actually creating. Yeah, I think he was actually creating a frame for the children to actually go in
That's
and
right. I'd forgotten that actually. It was
remember that.
I think it might have been one of the caretakers. He constructed a stage for the children then to put
A
on their
stage.
own
That's what it was. Yeah,
performances. Yeah, it
yeah,
was a stage and it had a bit of, I think from memory, a castle in the background of it. So
yes, yes,
yes, it
yes,
became their stage for performances, for many, many
yes.
impromptu performances.
Yes. And I remember thinking, wow. And the fact that the children had written their own labels on the baskets and the tubs as well, and helped to, they brought things from home or there was fabric and they could create, with their imagination, create their own dress ups. Yeah, I do remember that being a special place. And I think I was working with a school just this week on Monday. We had a Zoom call and they were talking about, what spaces are available. And one was a library hub and one was an art hub. But they said, oh, we can't leave things up though. And one, they have after school care in there, so they have to dismantle things. So we talked about baskets, tubs, with lids or ways to store them. That's what I saw at your school, where they really thought about that storage and what they were going to do with it. Thank you, Rachel. So I was thinking about a quote to go with this about children transforming themselves. Anybody can be anybody, anything can be anything. And I thought, oh, I have a quote in my book in chapter 5, Inquiring Through Play. The children in their socio-dramatic play walked in another person's shoes, took risks, used their imagination and creativity, and experienced the sheer joy of being someone else in the here and now. They saw the world through that character's eyes, spoke as that character would speak, and acted out what the character might do to solve a problem. So Vygotsky says that children are a head taller than themselves in play. So this is really a beautiful saying, I think, because we see the child of tomorrow, he also says, because they have more advanced skills and mental capacity for representation. So here we have some children where I was teaching, 4 to 5 year olds. Ellie on the left, she'd be about 4.5. And she picked up some fabric from the fabric box and put them all together and said, this is a rainbow. And she had a rainbow. And the child on the right, Matilda or Tilly, she said, oh, I'm going to make a bed with mine. So she put the beds down and they had some dramatic play about, going to sleep and waking up and wandering around inside the building. They even asked that, so the one on the left is quite light, but the one on the right is dark, that because they asked for the blinds to be drawn so that it was nighttime and they wanted to go to sleep, tend to go to sleep. So then the next thing they did was when I was outside and came back inside, I noticed they'd changed everything around. And they said that the one on the yellow piece of fabric was the desert and the blue piece of fabric was the rain. And then what I noticed when they were setting up this little play scenario, obviously before they started playing, children will often organise things. So they're called patterners in some literature. Patterners or organisers. They organise the play, and some children spend the whole time organising the play. They actually don't do a lot of play, which is beautiful because then they are, working out a way to create a scene which will help them in their future development as storytellers and story writers, or not even their future development, their current development. So here's just a short video. So the idea was, yes, well, that's a good idea, but we need a rainforest. We need a rainforest around there. So it's quite a bit of negotiation. You see some green fabric back there with some white spots, and then they went and got the rainforest and put that out as well. So yeah, spending a lot of time transforming materials as well as transforming themselves. And here's a group of children who love to dress up. And sometimes we had no costumes, no dress ups, because sometimes children would all want the same one, or they'd be, perhaps a little bit too fixed in what they were going to play if they had a fixed costume. So sometimes we just had fabric. And these children were sometimes Elsa, sometimes Supergirls, Superwomen. Yeah, beautiful. They you can see how happy they are. They put the globe in there to show that we're all the different people from around the world. And we have on the left, Kenzie loved dressing up and put this shawl around her to feel that she was from a different country. Whereas the children on the right, when we put the intercultural box out with a lot of intercultural dress ups for a specific purpose, for a different intention, they like dressing up in those. And another school I worked at in Adelaide, in the inner city, we had an intercultural, two big baskets of intercultural clothes as well, which we didn't have out all the time. But if we were doing some conceptual work around diversity or identity, that was time to, to bring these sort of artifacts and hats and things out. And on the left, you can see a child is going to go and cook with some beads. So just something that they chose to use for food rather than sort of plastic food or pretend food that might be molded in plastic. Yeah, they used something that they could transform. And the hat in Indonesia is called a blankon, and some of the children love the hats. And here they are using pestle and mortar, using little flowers that they'd found and some other material. The child on the right chose not to use the intercultural dress-ups, but the children on the left decided to help them get into role. And these children here, just the sheer joy, as we know from Reggio Emilia, nothing without joy, the sheer joy of, putting yourself in another's shoes and, just feeling different. And we often know from drama, don't we, and acting, that sometimes people who are quite shy and reticent really find their voice on the stage. And I found sometimes some children, when they did dress up, did transform into more talkative children than I'd noticed before. So the capacity of representation enables the child to transform objects and situations while simultaneously understanding the original identities, for example, of the object, the situation, or himself or herself. So really it's abstract thinking. So the child is thinking abstractly when they're transforming. The significance of this unique cognitive capacity of pretend play is receiving close attention in the theory of mind literature. This is due to the recognition that children who do not transform objects, now I've just flipped it on for some reason. Go back to reading. This is due to the recognition that children who do not transform objects and situations in play and therefore have poor pretend play ability, such as typically children on the autism spectrum, also find it very difficult to read social situations or people's intentions. And that's the research from Karen Stagniti and Carolyn Unsworth in in Melbourne, in Deakin University. Although I would say where it says, such as, and I've put typically children on the autism spectrum, in the Power of Play workshop, you will hear some stories about children who are on the autism spectrum who really can transform objects, can transform themselves, and can join into the play. This is scaffolded by me and the other adults in that situation. So a child who pretends to be an occupational therapist and to treat me and to ask me to do certain things and to do deep pressure and to do some deep breathing. So he's really taking on the role of the occupational therapist and teaching me what to do, what he had been taught to do. Fascinating. So I see that if, as adults, we're very sensitive and aware of children who might be neurodivergent, we can help to scaffold the play and we can encourage them to play with others as well. And I'll just tell one little anecdote. My neighbour across the road, Julie, is a very funny, very humorous woman. And she said, you know, I had two children in my class who were both on the autism spectrum, and neither child really played with anybody else. So she said to her teacher's assistant, watch this. So she went and got one of the children and she got the other one and she put them sort of together in front of her and she said, why don't you play together, you two? And they went, oh, okay. And I was talking to her the other day, this is like 3 years ago, and she said, they're in my class again in year 5. They still play together and they are best friends. So all they needed was a little nudge. And I know Matt Glover says in literacy to nudge, children with their writing or their story production. But yeah, just that little nudge. And 3 years later, they're still best of buddies. And their parents are absolutely over the moon. And she said, look, their play skills have developed over the years, particularly because they play with each other, often ball games and things like that. But there is some imagination in pretending that I'm a footballer and I'm getting the ball, and then they know all the footballers' names and they pretend to be them. So I think, yeah, again, nothing without joy, but also that ability to transform. I don't think we should categorize children as maybe not being able to do that. So the big ideas for this masterclass, now we're all settled in and know what we're doing, to be able to transform anything into anything and become anybody they imagine, which I've already talked quite a bit about. Children need the freedom and opportunity to innovate and improvise, just like the child Luke, who I was talking about, who is on the autism spectrum and pretended to be an occupational therapist. He set up his own little area in the library. I had brought some special chairs in and he liked them. And he said, you sit there and I sit here. Now, Jo, deep breath and then hold your breath and then out again. And I do that 5 times. You'll feel much better. So yeah, just I suppose role playing what he had seen the occupational therapist do with him. So the second one, play is the 7th brain circuit that we share with all animals. Neuroscientists have shown that play is essential for human brain development, and the motivation to play is hardwired. And the third one, inquiring through play, helps children tap into their play nature, the preferences they have for particular types of play. So I've already talked a fair bit about transformation, so I'll just go through a little bit more of this before we move on. So this is a school in Auckland, New Zealand, Kristen School, where I visited a couple of times now. And this is Jane's class. When I was doing some workshops there, I walked into her classroom and went, oh, yes, this is the PYP classroom. I can see a lot of things on the wall there that they're doing, their units of inquiry, how the world works. And yeah, then I noticed the fabric that was over the table. So I asked Jane and the children to explain about this. So she said we have a soft start to each day where students can settle in and play. So most of the den building, so in New Zealand they call them dens, or we call them cubbies, cubby buildings, happens in this time. The children know the spaces where the dens or the huts can stay for the day. But if they take up table space, sometimes they have to modify them so that they can do their learning experiences on tables. The children know they can build a den if they want to, and then take a book or something else they would like to do and relax and play in the spaces they've created. Jane tells me she's done this for quite a few years now, and the children are respectful of the materials and each other. And she finds this is a very calming influence on them, especially if they've been very busy getting ready for school, rushing to school in the morning. And she has a chance to talk to the parents as well. And she said it's beneficial because the children are very imaginative and creative in building, these spaces. And then I asked her, what do they create? What are the common things? She said, cafes, libraries, bookshops, pet shops. They're the most common themes. And then the children choose what to take inside, often by negotiation with other den designers. And she said some dens stay for a week and play continues each day. Others come apart and are rebuilt. But no loose parts are left. They have a sign, these will get gobbled up by the vacuum cleaner in the evening. So no loose parts on the floor. And they respect that very, very well. They don't want to lose their loose parts. And she said, we always reset on a Friday, and the building of the dens, the imaginative play, begins all over again on a Monday morning. So you can see there where they've put the fabric, and they've got some things on there and pegs to hold the fabric in place. And there you can see the little area where they can go inside. And again, for neurodivergent children, particularly children with sensory processing difficulties, I remember my son when he was at school in this exact grade level, grade two, he had a lot of sort of difficulty settling sometimes. And if he could go under an easel, where he felt a little bit enclosed with his book, or in a small tent that sometimes they would set up in the corner of the room, or in a space like this, it just gives them that feeling of enclosure. And those sensory children who really struggle with sensory issues, it really helps to calm them. And yeah, I think it's quite well known that they love enclosed spaces and feel more comfortable and secure. Before we go on, Rachel, any stories about you've got 3 children. Do they build dens or cubbies, or are they always outside in your beautiful outdoor area?
The cubbies are quite elaborate at our house often, and all of the pillows and all of the blankets will come off the beds to make the cubbies. The couches and any chairs will get dragged in. So yes, it becomes quite elaborate. We are very fortunate that the children have a space between their bedrooms, so they can also leave them up for a few days, and it's not in the main lounge area, so we can still move about. So yes, sometimes they even sleep in them.
Oh, do they? They do, because they've got their bedclothes in there and their pillows anyway that sleep in them. I remember my boys always building cubbies and having cubbies with all their friends and cousins and everything. And then you'd see you go into the office we got at the back, and there'd just be all fabric. Then you see a head pop up between. So there is actually a child in there who hasn't fallen asleep.
And
Yeah.
it
So
actually takes quite a lot of cooperation and negotiation skills. I have found to have 3 children building one together, because there's often the great collapse of the cubby when something's not quite stable, and that takes patience and rethinking and redesigning. So there's some great skills involved, not just in the play inside the cubbies, but in the design and negotiation of what they will look like and where the rooms will be and things.
That's right. And design technology, when you think about that, how to fasten, like you can see that great big bulldog clip there. That's a good one to use. Yeah, and they had ordinary pegs before, but they often pop off because
They pop off, yeah.
yeah. So I didn't put this photo in, but I meant to today. I was at the Steiner School in Adelaide, and they do have a lot of fabric, but they also have a wicker basket with fabric in it. Looked a bit messier fabric that the children take outside. So I haven't shown any outdoor cubbies, but in the Power of Play, we talk quite a lot about outdoor cubbies or outdoor dens as well. And I even did
Actually,
find
funny you say that. When my oldest was about 2, we bought about 5 different coloured sheets from IKEA, and those sheets are available for cubby building, and indoor or outdoor. And so that way, if they are doing outdoor cubbies, we're not quite so precious about
yes,
taking the things. They
fabric.
go in the washing machine, they're fine. So there's a terrible orange color and a red and a green sheet, but just single sheets that get made into
That's a
cubbies.
good idea, because often people think about cost, don't they, of supplying materials, and some old sheets. I think that's what was probably folded up in this basket that I saw at the Steiner School, and they don't have anything plastic, so it was a beautiful wicker basket with the older looking fabric that probably could get muddy in the mud kitchen and things like that. So this was what I found from Whitebread and O'Sullivan about preschool children's social pretend play, but obviously applies for everybody. Greater ambiguity in respect of materials may place more cognitive demands on children in terms of creating and sharing meanings. In terms of the play environment, more recent writings highlight the potential of moving beyond the traditional home corner to considering possibilities afforded by den making, and creating the whatever you want it to be place. So that's what transformation is about, isn't it? Transforming those pieces of fabric into something that they want to wear or something that they want to create. But I did think about this as well, in again that intercultural understanding that you want to promote, if that's something you're working on, or some of the concepts are identity or diversity. This is in a preschool where I was working, and this was outside on the deck next to the preschool. And yeah, we had a lot of children of Asian background, and so we felt it was important, even though it's not the traditional home corner. We felt that it was important to have artifacts from their cultures as well. And they loved using chopsticks. They loved using many things that they would use at home. And I wanted to talk a little bit about loose parts. And I was working with a school this week, and we were online discussing how they might build up their resources. And then when we were doing the call on Wednesday, I remembered what happened after we had set all this up. I was the outside teacher, and the inside teacher must have been reading a story in one corner. And there were a couple of children, boys actually, a couple of children who must have decided to tip the buttons out, tip some of the shells out, the bread tags, the wood, the trays and the beads, some bark. And they were swimming, like swimming in all of these loose parts when I walked in. And I was thinking, oh, I've encouraged the teachers and the co-teachers to do this, and now it's like, oh, nightmare. So I swapped with the inside teacher, and she went outside, and I came in, and I said, obviously having a good time with all this, but gee, it's packing up time. And so we started to pack up. And what I found was, and it was amazing classifying and sorting exercise, because then they had to read the labels, read the photographs, work out which items, which loose part went in which basket. And we had this massive sorting exercise of all these things going everywhere. So we decided maybe not quite so many things out, because this also extended further along as well with another lot of baskets. So that helped us. Children help you to learn things. So we have cupboards inside, and we put some things inside, especially things like the sea animals, the dinosaurs, the wild animals and things like that, to go with some of these things. And maybe some of the smaller things like the buttons, we put a few less buttons in there. And we did use them for maths, for a little bit more structured activities, but they were used basically as loose parts for play. So now I've lost that. There we go. So these are the sums of the things that they did. Playtime meshed into math investigation time, as we know, Rachel, from Mess About, which is part of your the program that you run, which I might get you to talk about in a moment when I've shown a couple more of these. So yes, children naturally do patterns, naturally love to organise materials, and then they start to tell stories. So this was a child called Jack, and he, as you can see, beautiful polished unit blocks in the background there. Didn't want to use those. This is a block corner, but it's also a space where children can create whatever they want to. So he loved the found materials, he loved the natural materials, and there's a sign there, building in progress. So we left that up for a day or two. And on the right, you can see he's put some kangaroos and a koala there, and he's gone outside and got some leaves and added the leaves as well. So he was a very reticent, very, very quiet child. He didn't talk very much at all. And I thought, oh, he mostly does solitary play, which is fine. He's very happy doing that. But I wondered if I could encourage him to work with other children as well, and to share some of his intricate works and his story. So let's have a look. So maybe we can have a think about that, the kinds of loose parts that we provide for children, and if they are open-ended enough for them to create their own stories and their own ideas. So I did ask this question on 2 nights ago, on Wednesday night. Do you think we sometimes provide too many provocations for children, which might stifle their creativity? And we did have an answer in the chat, and I've asked Claire to send it to me, which she did today. I used to be the teacher who set up centres every morning, but after attending the Power of Play course, I did a complete 180-degree turn. Now that my students initiate their own centres and projects, these projects tend to last longer and go deeper. I noticed an increase in communication, risk-taking, and an overall sense of pride when the children were able to take the lead in their own play. And she's from the International Community School in Amsterdam, and she's a teaching and learning coach, and she works with 5 to 6-year-olds. Do you have anything to add to that, Rachel, at all about thinking about these kinds of things?
Well, I know that in Blue School, where my own children attend, it's a mix. So there are some provocations out, but there's also lots of different materials that children know where to access, and also know that they're very free to move materials from one place to another. So in the block corner, for example, there are some sort of pre-cut blocks, but there's also a lot of loose part materials in that, like bottle caps and things. And children quite frequently will bring the blocks and the cars and the dinosaurs from somewhere else and start to build their worlds in those spaces. And having some of those materials out all of the time, there's always an area where there's lots of both dinosaurs and other animals. There's always vehicles that children can sort of move about spaces, and there's always lots of arts and crafts supplies that children can access, and so children know where to get the things that they want, and they do, and they have lots
Mm,
of time to set that up for
mm,
themselves. And also when they do have provocations out on the table, they are just that. Children, like if there's something on the Play-Doh table as a provocation, children also know that they're very much free to build whatever they want to build. They don't have to
mhm.
follow that provocation. It's not a task
Application.
that's been set, it's an invitation.
An invitation. I like that word, actually. I like that word, invitation. I think that's actually quite a powerful word. Mm. So, what I wanted to talk a little bit about was we had a question, a couple of questions actually on Wednesday night about, but how do you balance, you've got things that you want to teach and things that you want to impart to children. And then we talked a bit about intentional teaching. And this is one definition. This is for about children 3 to 5 years. Effective intentional teaching means recognizing some of the questions and ideas that children are engaged in through their interests and supporting children to explore and extend these. And we also talked about, that your curriculum. So you know what you need to teach in your mind that is required by your particular curriculum, whether it's a state one or PYP or an international school curriculum that you follow. So you have those ideas of, in your mind of not ideas, but those sort of, I guess, curriculum plans. And so you know how to meld that with what the children's interests are. And I have an example here at the preschool where I was working for quite a number of years. We set up a frog pond, so the parents helped as well, and just lined an area with black plastic and then the rocks around the plants. And then we introduced tadpoles, and that some of them did transform. It's about transformation, isn't it? Transform into frogs. And so they were, often the children were gathering around looking for the frogs and hearing them, and they couldn't actually find them. And then we had got more tadpoles. Yeah, so the frog, the life cycle became a really important thing, and frogs were, interesting for the children. So every day in the morning and the afternoon, we had our small group time for a story or some math experiences or anything really. Usually it was literacy, but sometimes also mathematics, sometimes social studies and science. So I decided to follow up on the frog theme. And you might notice the child at the back, Jack, with the striped shirt. He was the one who was doing solitary play and doing quite incredible creations with all of the found and natural materials. So I asked him to help me set up something before the other children came in from outdoor play, because he was always in that block area just there. And so he got this huge piece of wood, and he made a slide for the frogs to slide down the slide into that small pond there that he made with some blue material. So my intention, I mean, as a preschool teacher of this age, I always have multiple ideas in my head. One of them was to get Jake to explain to the children what he'd created. And the other idea, I had a child on the autism spectrum who was sitting on my lap because I thought he either wouldn't be able to join in or he might run away from my group to another group. So I had him sitting there and he was looking at the frogs. I wanted to do the, 5 little frogs went out one day over the pond and, far away. I wanted to do that, to do a little bit of singing and some mathematics as well. So I also thought the children will create their own stories once Jake explains. So he did. He was very quiet, and they all listened quietly. But he explained this is the way that the frogs slide into the pond, and yeah. And then my idea of mapping was also, this is the kindergarten area, this is where the gate is, this is the street, this is yeah. So in my mind, we were also doing some mapping. So I think there's that intentionality of what skills we want children to learn and what we take from them and their interests. So this also links to language, the language development of children. Research on play and language in preschool and school-age children has linked play to developments in narrative skills such as story comprehension and story production. For example, a couple of researchers reported that 4-year-old children showed an early emergence of narrative competence when narratives were elicited in play situations than when they were directly elicited through non-play contexts. And because I was also thinking about older children that I've worked with, I thought about a book that one of the children had written in Writer's Workshop, Rishika, her name is. And in the class with 7 and 8-year-olds, so she's 8, they had choice time every day where they could choose what they wanted to do. And some of them chose actually to do bookmaking and Writer's Workshop during their choice time. Some of them were just creating more and more and more books. But there was a group of children who loved loose parts, and some of the loose parts were conventional loose parts, and they were Lego and Duplo. Now, you might wonder why 7 and 8-year-olds will play with Duplo, but there was a group of children who just loved Duplo. They could build towers much higher and much quicker than they could with the Lego, and they just liked to use it. And so they would go down to the kindergarten room and the preschool room and borrow the Duplo and all the little figures, and they would make various things with them during their choice time. And they often would label them and write stories as well. So this child, Rishika, said, right, there's a bit of a battle going on in the class because some like Lego and some like Duplo, and there's a little bit of tension between that. So she wrote the story, Legoland versus Duplo Land, the start of the battle. And I'll just read a little bit of it. Cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. Everyone got their hands on every item. Lego was a big hit, but nobody wanted Duplo. Only one block. Duplo blocks were very jealous of Lego blocks, so they put on a battle. They both, Lego and Duplo, in brackets, liked the wilderness, so they made the battle in the woods. Duplo called themselves the lumberjacks, and Lego called themselves the porcupines. Hey, hey, lumberjacks, yelled Lego. Shh, porcupines, yelled Duplo. The battle began. And then she wrote the story turned into a comic. Now, what I found interesting as well is that she didn't have the restrictions of the writing paper where it might be a box for drawing their little picture and some lines underneath. We used blank books in Writer's Workshop, and she turned hers into a comic. And in the end was actually some resolution between Lego and Legoland and Duplo Land that they both were, regarded as, good things to have and good things to play with. So the other thing that they used to love was dinosaurs, and this particular child in Writer's Workshop, after the play period, wrote a book, Super Dino Land. Not that we asked them in particular to, play and then to write, but this some of the children just naturally chose to. It was a natural progression. And the school I was talking to this week, they told me that they do draw, talk, write. And, obviously the drawing is the incentive and the kind of creative arts play that they do to get them into the zone of writing. So I talked to the school about, play. Play is often, it could be small world or large world play, a way of generating ideas for stories. And really, when you think about it, writing a story cold, is sometimes quite difficult because for children who, maybe are not quite tuned in to story writing, playing or drawing and talking is a way of them, tuning in to each other's ideas and their own ideas, really, so that they can record them. So narrative competence has been shown to improve when play is involved. So I was also talking to the school this week about some loose parts for their setting up play, and I recommended some blocks called Kaplan blocks. And I did look online today, and I found them in Australia at a store, and they were reduced. And so these are wonderful blocks. But Rachel and I were talking off camera before about, sometimes it's hard to afford resources when you're starting on your play journey or even when you're continuing it. So these, in this particular preschool where I was working, one of the teachers' husbands worked in a school, a high school, and they had a woodwork department. So she would always bring in stacks and stacks and stacks of wood, so we could use it for woodwork, or we could use it as loose parts. So these are just wood offcuts, just random shapes. So we put that into our, we had small and medium and large, and the children naturally just made zoo enclosures. Zoo, got asked for the zoo animals, made zoo enclosures, and then they would add, fabric for their water. And at the back, you can see we also sourced for free some frames, passe-partout, I think they're called, some frames from a framing shop that they didn't want anymore, some white ones. So they used them for their enclosures as well. So yeah, found some things that we could recycle and reuse, but also parents and other people donating us some fabric. So experience tells us that creativity of children, facilitated by their great flexibility of thought and eagerness to explore, emerges from multiple experiences, from the reassurance of freedom that legitimizes their search for cognitive procedures and solutions, mixed with expansions that come from imagination and fantasy, as well as deep inner impulses. And that's from Malaguzzi in Reggio Emilia. When I was there, I picked up the identity card of the Diana School. I thought, wow, that's a very wise man talking about creativity and imagination and fantasy. So I think the last slide in this section is slightly different way of transforming. I've talked about objects and I've talked about, fabric, loose parts. This particular child was involved with me and the teacher in a process drama, and everybody in the room had decided which person in the community they wanted to be. So we had a group of firefighters, a group of bakers, we had, I think, nurses, doctors, police, various people that they had seen either visit our school or we had visited them. So this particular child had built up belief by setting up a little firefighter area. He wrote, I'm a firefighter, we drew a fire station, and that was their base. And then I said, the drama begins now, and off he went. And later on, when we were doing an assessment with the drama, and it's in my chapter in my book, Inquiring Through Drama, chapter 6, after the chapter on play, so we wanted to find out what they were thinking about. How do you help others in the community? Because our concept that we were looking at, one of the conceptual understandings, was interdependence. So this particular child was hungry afterwards and then went to the bakery to get something to eat and then got injured. Sore leg, burns, had to go to the doctor. So there was a lot of interaction in the room, not just the firefighting, but going to the baker and going to the doctor. And so I asked him, how do you help others? And he said, I want to be a firefighter because I want to save the world. And so that was that, concept of interdependence. So maybe I'll tune Rachel in here for a minute because she's the conceptual person, about how children learn concepts. Big topic, another hour webinar, but
Certainly, there's been several masterclasses on the topic of how children learn concepts, but I think in a play-based situation, it's also about teachers being aware of what concepts we want to explore, expose children to, and play can be a wonderful way of helping students to organize their thinking and helping students to be processing some of the learning that they have done. So we talk about the idea of a more structured play in terms of conceptual play where the teacher gets involved in the play and asks questions that help children to process some of the learning that they have been doing, much like this, where the children are taking on different community roles and exploring the concept of interdependence, and then who did you need in the community. By being intentional about what concepts we want students to learn about and what understandings we want to build, we can support them in taking on roles and exploring relationships between concepts through that beautiful and rich play-based learning.
Thanks, Rachel. Always good to get your perspective on that. So one of the questions that did arise in the masterclass 2 nights ago is, do you find that there are cultural differences in how children play? We thought that was quite an interesting question. We had some good feedback in the chat and some good discussions about that. And so Rachel and I had another chat about that tonight. Always interesting to do things the second time. Um, and we sort of thought that really it depends on the children and their experiences. So maybe Rachel, if you, because that was your point to me tonight, maybe you can explain a little bit about that.
Yeah, I said I don't know that it's so much cultural differences in how children play as much as differences in children's play experiences. So if children are coming from an environment where they haven't had a lot of experience of play, then they may find it harder to engage in play or um, may play in certain ways. You had talked about children who needed a lot of time to run. Um, and children, but in an environment where children have had over the course of the year, or just children coming in have had lots of opportunities to play. Personally, I don't see so many differences that are cultural differences. It's more
Mm,
about play experience.
mm. Yeah, so I've been thinking about that since the person asked that question. And the way I answered it the other night, I probably think slightly differently now talking to Rachel. But the way I answered it the other night was that I do remember a couple of years ago working with a preschool, and they called me in and said, "Oh, we're having trouble because there's a group of children, quite a big group out of their 35 children, who just run all the time, run in circles, just run all around the preschool, and they don't seem to want to when they're outdoors anyway. When they don't seem to want to settle. So first of all, I said, well, why don't they don't want to run? So we'll take them over to the school oval, which was next door, and would do some running races and do some special whatever they want to do, some games and you know. So they designed some games and games that involve running and things like that. And anyway, we came back and they're still running, lots of running. And what I said the other night was there were a lot of children who I noticed from India and Pakistan who had recently migrated to Australia, maybe when they were 2 or 3, and they were now 4 and 5. So I thought perhaps it was the environment that they lived in India or Pakistan. Maybe they lived in high-rise apartments, in Mumbai or something like that. I wasn't sure of their background, and maybe that was why it was. But really, Rachel was talking tonight about perhaps it's the experiences they've had, and perhaps if they weren't living in high-rise, this is, Australia, space, freedom, huge amounts of land. So yeah, what I explained the other night was that what we ended up doing was thinking heavy work and work that's going to engage them mentally, but it's also going to engage them physically. So we came up with the idea of obstacle courses. And so we sat with all the children, particularly the children who are the runners, and said, would you like to build obstacle courses? And we sort of showed a few photographs and talked a bit about what they are. Yes, yes, yes. Can we get the tunnel from, we've seen that tunnel that's in the shed and we've never rode it out. Yes, you can get the tunnel. What about those long planks? And we had some planks out in A-frames. It's a big thing in Australia. Yes, we want the tallest A-frame, like the tallest you can get. And can we put the planks really high? So we have soft fall underneath, so that's not a problem. So they dug the other night on the call, said, "Oh, I get my children, especially older children, to draw a plan first before we build something." And I said, "Yeah, yeah, we did. We designed. They drew or they constructed something out of Lego or some, pipe cleaners or whatever to show what they wanted to do." So this was a way of the children playing and transforming, and yeah, I suppose using up that energy that they had, but also learning, that Australia, I suppose we're used to unstructured play, but they weren't. So they just took their time. And there was another example I had in the Christian school in Auckland when I took a drama class. These were 3 and 4 year olds though. And they spoke some English, but there were a lot of children of Chinese background. And we tried a drama where you pretend to go out in the woods and collect things. But because we didn't have maybe any props, they really struggled. We had built up belief and we had drawings and pictures of trees and things like that, but they really struggled to actually engage in that drama. So we had to go back and then, oh, okay, we need props. We need, a little basket for them to carry some actual leaves. So yeah, that was an interesting question that someone asked, and we have thought about that since, haven't we, Rachel? And said probably more due to their experience and their background. So access to socio-dramatic play, exactly what we've been talking about actually. Some children may not be able to transform an object. They may not be able to be anybody. They may not be able to transform something into something else. So perhaps they might need some scaffolding and some co-playing, which is what you said, Rachel, didn't you, about your, when you talked about concepts. So these were some children who I was working with. Minjin on the left is from Korea. He spoke pretty good English, reasonably good English. He'd been in the country maybe 2 or 3 years. Martin had only just arrived that year and had some English, but was still learning. And one of the things I found was after the police had visited, they were pretty interested in the walkie-talkie. So again, with those loose parts, the woodwork at the woodwork bench, they made walkie-talkies with the wood and the pop sticks, and then would talk into them. Sometimes they would talk Mandarin if there were a couple of them. These boys were both Mandarin speakers, so they would speak in Mandarin, but they wanted to join the play. I sensed from watching them, observing for quite a while, on a few days. I thought they really want to join in, but they're not quite sure how to. They don't have the language. Hal had just arrived from China, and he could say hello, and I want to go to the toilet. And so that was really going to help him to join the play. So some of the things that I helped to orchestrate, but some of them was completely natural, was that the children could hover, but then watch with me what was going on. So Professor Whitington, Victoria, and Elaine Scrafton did quite a lot of research in my hometown in Adelaide. And they said that child participants actively attempted to enter play, demonstrated its importance to them. Consistent with sociocultural theory, in this study, a nexus was observed between children's access to and participation in play and their language proficiency and confidence. The study identified major challenges in accessing play for culturally and linguistically diverse children who are very likely to, which is very likely to affect their learning. And shyness was found to be a hurdle, as was language competence and confidence. So children who were not yet verbal or confident in English found accessing play challenging, but were sometimes facilitated by peers, which I thought that was interesting too. Findings suggest a stronger role for educators than was found here in this study and in other studies, another lot of studies I looked up as well. Educators could facilitate access by being available to build common ground between children of diverse cultural backgrounds, co-playing and scaffolding negotiations, and elaborating on the children's play themes. So here we have the children practicing out of role. So they're away from the tree now. There's no big action happening. And so there were things like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, they'd count, or they'd go help or rescue. And so they were practicing, what kind of things they might say. And you can see Hal on the right really becoming more animated. And I was saying to Rachel and the people on the call the other night that one time I looked at him and he just picked up the walkie-talkie and went, and just, sort of like screamed into it. And I thought, there's him, like, he really wants to talk and he's releasing that emotion. But luckily, Martin and he could also speak Mandarin. So they could have that communication together. Minjin didn't have anybody else who spoke Korean, so he probably progressed a bit faster learning English. But these two continued their bilingual, talking and played a lot together. So here's Minjin practicing as well. And then Athena said, my cat Rainbow is stuck up in the tree. So that was I listened to that. She was telling me as well. And that was my cue. I can get these boys involved now. So Minjin, Martin, Hal, come over here. And we could see the cat stuck up in the tree. So they were immediately then starting to engage in the play. And so Minjin went off and called, help, help, rescue, rescue. And Martin starts climbing the tree to rescue the cat. So there's Martin, never seen him quite as animated as that. So happy he'd discovered, seeing the cat up in the tree. But the yellow band there is for occupational health and safety reasons. They're not supposed to climb higher than where the yellow bands are. And he was asking me then, higher, go higher, get cat. I said, yes, I'm here. And I'll hold your walkie-talkie though. So you stab yourself and you can climb up and get the cat. So then, after that, there were a lot more scenarios of people getting stuck in the tree, cats getting stuck, dogs, all these animals were getting thrown up in the tree and they were trying to catch them. So Some strategies to enable access to play, help children create a prop that fits the play context or source a prop, rehearse language structures out of role or in role, make available loose parts such as wood or fabric that's relevant to your current focus and or children's interests, observe what happens, and where needed, the educators facilitate co-play and or scaffold. Did you want to add anything to that, Rachel, before we move on to the next little topic?
I don't know. Keep going. You're good.
Beautiful. Okay. Here we go. So the neuroscience behind play. A few people have written to me asking they missed out on this part because they had to go to meetings on Wednesday. So here we go. The neuroscience behind play. Play is the seventh brain circuit, as I mentioned in the introduction, that we share with all animals. And neuroscientists have shown that play is essential for human brain development, and the motivation to play is hardwired. So Dr. Stuart Brown is a neuroscientist still practicing in the United States and currently has a new webinar coming up, which I'll tell you about a little bit later. So this is what he told us in a TED Talk, if you're interested to follow up. TED Talk, it's Dr. Stuart Brown. This is in Manitoba, Canada, on the Hudson Lakes. And two huskies on the right there are tethered with a chain. And a photographer, a German photographer, was just photographing the huskies and interested in the snow and everything. And then the photographer was sitting there. He noticed a huge, hungry polar bear coming towards the huskies, and thought, "Oh, well, those huskies, they're dead in the water. They're dead in the water. They're gone." And he said that the male polar bear has a predatory gaze. This is what Stuart Brown says on the TED Talk. And so he's hungry and he wants to, obviously eat the dogs. But on the other side, the female huskies are in a play bow, wagging their tails. And the polar bear picks this up, notices, the huskies are playing. Something unusual happens, and that fixed gaze of the panda bear changes as he recognised that the puppy, the one we can see closest to us, wants to play. And then they become, I suppose, play buddies. He says they enter a ballet. They are in an altered state. They are in a state of play. It's that state that allows these two creatures to explore the possible. They are doing something that neither would have done without the play signals. A marvellous example of how a differential in power, can be overridden by a process of nature that's in all of us, and how a play signal overrides the carnivorous nature. So this is what happens. The one particular husky who's still tethered becomes friends with the polar bear, and the polar bear comes back to visit on other days as well. So humans and all mammals have a biological drive to play that has evolved over millions of years. The drive to play is as fundamental as our drives for food and for sleep. And here we have the polar bear, no claws out, ready to pounce, just relaxing, and the dog with that beautiful look on its face, adoringly. So yeah, absolutely hardwired to play and overriding that predatory desire and their hunger, really. So there was a neuroscientist, Jack Pansket, and he, a prominent neuroscientist, identified 7 foundational brain circuits that are the primary emotions we're born with, and one of them, as you can see at the bottom, is play. So these primal emotions are with us at birth, pre-wired in our midbrain, an ancient part of the human brain. The instinct to play is built into our biology, the play circuits in our brain. These play circuits are buried deep in our midbrain, waiting to be activated. And when the neurons of our play circuits are activated by playful elements in our environment, they motivate us to engage with those elements. For example, when the presence of a ball, a puppy, or a fun friend activates our play circuits, as happened with the polar bear, we feel an urge to turn our attention to that stimulus and engage with it, toss the ball, pet the puppy, or joke with a friend. So when the brain's play circuits are activated, they send signals from the midbrain to the cortex, which is the top part of the brain, and the cerebellum, the bottom of the at the back of the brain. With repetition, these signals create neural pathways wiring the brain. So here we have Marion Diamond, and I mentioned her in the blurb. So I did a bit of research about her. I've read about her in university, but not for a while. So for a few decades before the early 60s, it was thought that neurons in the brain were fixed. Thanks to Professor Marion Diamond and her team, and a pioneering neuroscientist at the University of California, we learned about neuroplasticity, that the brain continues to create new neurons. So neuroscience shows us that nothing lights up the brain like play. Three-dimensional play fires up the cerebellum, puts a lot of impulses into the frontal lobe, the executive function portion, the frontal lobe, the frontal prefrontal cortex, and helps contextual memory be developed. So Marion showed us very clearly, I think she has a book called The Magic of Trees, trees meaning all of the neurons that are connected. She showed that if children don't have enriched environments for play, then the neural pathways aren't activated or as easily activated. So really, it's the same for all of us. You know, my mother is in aged care. She's 92. And I see when she plays, they do drumming on big, huge balls and they do Tai Chi. The times I go and I say to her, "Oh, you've done a class today." "Yeah, I have. And now I'm reading my book." The days when she hasn't done a class or she hasn't played, "Oh, yeah, four walls, a bit boring. Need to go for a walk." Yeah, absolutely. So I think that whole idea of the play circuits being activated applies from before birth, really, in utero. When I used to sing to my son, who still responds to that song now, in utero through to we don't like old age, young age, when people yeah perhaps at the end of their life, towards the end of their life, they still need to play. So the environments and activities that evoke playful feelings are unique to each of us. Each of us has an inherent play nature that is as unique as our fingerprints. Our play circuits create our play nature, the preferences we have for particular types of play, such as movement play, object play, or social play, and I would add rough and tumble play, sociodramatic play. As we grow, those preferences expand, interact, and if not suppressed, lead to our play personality. The more that very young children are able to act from their play nature, the better they will develop and reinforce the neural circuits in other parts of their brain. Circuits that become the neural pathways of many life skills. So by the time children are in the classroom, they've been taught to suppress their natural play-based curiosity. Now, that may not be the case for the people listening to this webinar, this masterclass tonight, because you're here because you're interested in play. This is written by Dr. Brown, thinking about America currently, and the way that play has been suppressed by recess and lunch times becoming shorter and shorter and shorter, and choice times and play times becoming less and less and less, which is very strongly documented. So Dr. Brown discovered that lack of play for children increases the prevalence of depression, inflexibility, poor adaptability to changing conditions, lack of empathy, poor impulse control, addictive predilections, mood-driven behaviour, and sometimes violence. Fortunately, he says, the awareness that play is linked to positive academic performance is making some policy headway. So we hope that's the case. So play is inquiry. Inquiring through play helps children tap into their play nature, the preferences they have for particular types of play. And I will get you to talk in a minute, Rachel, about what you talked about the other night, the concept of fairness, just after I do this quote, if that's all right. That would be a nice lead-in. So my guru in inquiry is Kathy Short, Professor Kathy Short from the University of Arizona, who I've heard speak quite a number of times and read all her books. Inquiry is a collaborative process of connecting to and reaching beyond current understandings to explore tensions significant to learners. Picking up on this definition by Professor Kathy Short of inquiry as exploring tensions significant to learners, in my research, I observed dramatic tension in children's play. There may be dramatic tension in role, such as the baby won't sleep or we've run out of food, and out of role tension, such as he won't be my friend or they won't play with me. In all these instances, children are exploring tensions significant to them. So Sam was a very energetic, boisterous child, and he used to wear like the Spider-Man, shirt and undo it, and Pac-Man and undo that, and something else was in there. Spider-Man backpack, Spider-Man, everything, lunchbox. So his brain was full of it. So he really needed to express what he was feeling about all that, because it was important for him to, have these avenues like play in our centre to explore what he was watching on his PlayStation and on television and on various devices that he had. So he decided to make web shooters. So these are his web shooters, and he used to tape pop sticks to his hands to shoot Spider-Man's webs. So I think I actually included a little video here. And here I am. I'm just trying to clarify with him out of role. I'm not interrupting his play. Some children had complained to me, quite a few children, over a couple of days, that he was pointing them in their eyes, and they were too, sort of, they were found it too confronting that he was shooting with these pop sticks. So I was just clarifying with him what they were actually for. I don't know if I don't think I enabled the video, the sound, but I'll just play a little bit and explain what's happening when I'm asking him.
Let down his web shooters and shoot them.
So does he have web shooters but web shooters are to shoot the web out, isn't it?
Yeah.
So he,
The trees and leaves.
but the web shooters only make a web. They don't actually, not like guns.
Yeah.
They're not guns. They're web shooters that shoot. They only shoot the web out.
Yeah. When they shoot the web and then he must stuck the bad guys on. But in the TV show he shoots out his web shooters to get the baddies stuck.
Okay, so that's all right. You can make a pretend net to get the baddies. So his idea with the web shooters, when we clarified it, was to no, they're not. Yeah, no, they're not guns. That's right. They are web shooters, and it's to get the baddies stuck. So again, important for us to recognise that, the good and evil. I mean, how long have we, for centuries, people have, told stories about good and evil, and so it's important. These are I suppose, traditional ancient stories that they need to tell and grapple with, good and bad and evil. So it was interesting for me because he wasn't really understanding that maybe he was impinging on other people in his play and some of his friends that he was leading. So Judith Wells-Lindfors, who's a guru of mine in inquiry as well, she says, in their act of inquiry, the inquirer pursues their own wants, but must simultaneously take others' wants into account. If they do not, then the act may offend. There is good reason to be concerned that children learn how to inquire without offending others. The self-balancing game they play as they manage their inquiry acts, their play as inquiry, has relevance because it's the essence of all social interaction. And she continues, isn't the managing of the desires of self and other basic to life in a democratic society? When we focus on self's wants and needs, we speak of justice and rights. We seek a just society. We say that protects the individual's rights. And when we focus on the wants and needs of others, we speak of a caring society, words that have an empathetic ring. And she concludes the double bind, autonomy on the one hand and affiliation on the other. My needs and wants and yours too. So there are lots of sort of points of view, aren't there, about superhero play and about, the way that children play that might be impinging on others. And I know we're running short of time now because I've got to hurry up and finish. But Rachel, can you just mention what you said to me the other day when we were preparing about a television program that your children were watching and what happened after they watched it?
Oh, I was just saying that there are some television programs that we've found with our own children we need to stop them from watching because following watching those programs, particularly PJ Masks was the one that came to mind for me, that the children play got particularly rough with each other. And so we just stopped watching those for a while until that settled down again.
And that's what we talked about on Wednesday night a little bit of back and forth in the chat, what to do. And when I said that I had spoken to, we're calling him Sam's mum and dad and grandma and grandpa, about, the sort of superhero play, which we were doing and, you know, enabling, but how much does he watch, you know, on on his devices? And they were like, oh, a lot, you know, a lot. And I said, because it's all in his mind, and it does need to come out, but maybe it's too much for him to process. And perhaps some of the programs maybe not so inappropriate, so appropriate. So that parent education isn't just inviting parents along to a parent talk and talking about, you know, screens are good for these things and great for that and great for communication, but maybe not an excessive amount, and the kinds of programs that they might watch. It's really that one-on-one contact with that parent, and talking to them. And they did. They reduced it, and they also got a plain lunchbox and a plain drink bottle, not so many, you know, superhero t-shirts. And yeah, he did calm, I noticed. It might have been maturation as well. And then he played with his web shooters and shot the webs and caught the baddies, and his friends did the same thing. So he was able to self-regulate his behavior. And then, you know, again, that orchestration we do as teachers, you know, I set up, not saying what it was, just a steering wheel and a lot of chairs. Oh, you know, so sometimes it was a police car or a fire station, or sometimes it was a superhero car, a fire engine, I mean, or a train or anything, aeroplane. So this kind of channeled that into also all traveling around together. And then sometimes they were painting their fire engines, making fire engines in this case. A little bit orchestrated by me, but they wanted to create a space where they could have their fire engine play. And then he created costumes as well. A little bit of massaging from me as well. You know, you're a superhero. Which one are you today? Pac-Man. Oh, would you like to make a Pac-Man costume? Yeah. So I think there's ways that we can, rather than, I don't know, some people have banned superhero play. And when I've taught in those places, the children have got something in their hand and then they go, it's not a gun, Jo, it's a stick, it's not a gun. And I think, oh, they can transform. But as soon as there's no one looking, out come the guns. So I think, you know, if we have these kinds of programs in our society, which are produced, and we feed them to children, then we can't expect them not to replicate what they see. And in real life, you know, some children would know about some of the things that happen in some countries where there is not very good gun control. Okay, so I reckon we're getting towards the end. I've got to hurry up now. So in their active inquiry, the inquirer pursues their own wants, but must simultaneously take others' wants into account. If they do not, then the act may offend. So this is not for us to answer now. This is for you if you would like to think about it, or if you're working with your little team watching this. How do you help children to balance their wants and simultaneously take into account the wants of others? Wow, big question, but one that's really worth thinking about in our environment with young children who are learning to self-regulate. So this is a beautiful, some words I found on LinkedIn, and I asked Aga, who's a PYP coordinator in Poland in an international school, if I could use this in the masterclass, and she said yes. So here we are. Cubs that don't play die. Dolphins that don't play lose the very intelligence their enormous brains evolved to hold. Species that play survive. Humans are no different. Our brains love play. Our humanity depends on play. This is not the time to politely remind anyone that play is important. This is the time to shout. If we do not return to play, we do not survive. Play is how we heal, imagine, and resist. Play is how we survive. Thank you, Aga, as a play and childhood advocate and activist. And if you're not on LinkedIn or you're not on with Aga, you get on there and you'll get a couple of quotes every week. So just before I say thank you to everybody, I just wanted to tell one little story that I told the other night as well, when we were doing the original masterclass. When I was living in Europe for 14 years, teaching and working, wonderful schools and a lot of freedom to innovate and improvise, amazing. But I came back to Australia, not really in some ways wanting to come back, but when I worked for the education department here, and they had marvelous conferences. And one particular conference, I remember when I came back, we had Lillian Katz and Betty Jones, two big play gurus in my life and university life and study from America. And Betty Jones gave the final keynote, and it was the time of the Iraq-US war. And she stood up, and I never forget it, and she said, a friend of mine was a pacifist, and she didn't really believe in children having weapons or playing with swords or anything like that. But her son really was keen to play with little figurines of soldiers and little cavalry and little cannons and whatever. And someone gave him a whole set of things, and she was like, I don't really want him to play with them, but okay, he's interested in this. So he was out in the garden, every second day, playing with all these things, having battles and everything. And she was looking through the window where she was washing up, and she was just, oh, is this the right thing? Is he going to become a warmonger? Is he going to go in the army or the Navy or the Air Force or something like that? Anyway, one day when he was a bit older, I'm not quite sure how old, he packed up the box and brought it inside and said, I finished playing with those now, Mum. I don't need them anymore. And her final line in the keynote was, I wish George W. Bush had played more in his early life. Yeah, wow. So play, the importance of play, the importance for us to advocate for it, which is why we're doing the second masterclass, why we're repeating it. Someone in the admin was like, oh, we just send out an apology. We're like, no, we can't do that. We would redo it for you all. And I keep seeing if that recording button is is beeping tonight, which I didn't look at.
Yes, I've checked on it many, many times.
Yeah, I've checked it many times too. I'm looking up in the air. So just before we leave you, I'd like to thank the children who are in these photographs and whose stories I've told, and of course their families, the schools and preschools who enabled me to share their stories, and Rachel French and Professional Learning International who have hosted these two complimentary masterclasses. So it's been interesting doing it a second time. I've learned more and talking to Rachel. So the Power of Play, which I mentioned earlier, but you might not have tuned in for that, I'm going to be holding in October. I think it's October 27 with these wonderful educators from around the world. And I have another course called Playful Literacies, Honouring Children's Agency. It'll be the last time we run that course. So please join me if you never have. And we did have some questions, which I actually won't go into now because it's getting too late, about, how do you do this kind of playful learning in schools when we have, top-down curriculum and standardized testing and all these sorts of things. So my answer is come along to that course and you'll find out. It's me and Rachel and Jane De La Haye, who has taught all over the world. She's from England originally, but she's now living in New Zealand. So that's a course next year, but you can enroll now through Professional Learning International. And in case anybody is interested in my book, like I said, I've got a beautiful chapter inquiring through play and one inquiring through drama, inquiring through read alouds and responses. Yeah, it goes onto all of those. So there's my website if you want to screenshot that. If you want to look anything up, there's some reviews of my workshops on there as well. And my book is still available. The International Baccalaureate still selling that. And yeah, still timeless information about many things. Questions we are not going to do because we've actually covered them throughout this second.
Yes, Jo has artfully woven those questions from the first round into today's session. So thank you, Jo, for putting your time into making sure that in the replay we didn't miss some of those great questions.